Let's talk more about this now with Amabhungane Centre for Journalism's Susan Comrie. Susan, a very good evening to you. So you've been reporting on this Gasprombank story with PetroSA, and you had picked up some concerns even in what you said were changes to the bid itself to basically disadvantage the other bidders in favour of Gasprombank. PetroSA says it's done its best to make sure that this is a process that is above board. Does that now settle it? Is a line drawn under this?
Certainly not for us. I mean, I think anyone who looks at the process that was followed, you know, your segment has done a great job of highlighting the two real issues that exist here. The one issue being how Gasprombank was selected, and the other issue being the question of whether we do actually want to partner with Gasprombank. Now, on the issue of how the bids were selected, what we were able to see from the internal documents that were leaked to us was that PetroSA had actually received an unsolicited bid from Gasprombank before they even wrote the tender. Now, they put together a tender which has quite a strange sort of combination of evaluation criteria. You know, a large part of it is around sort of does the bidder have, you know, lots of money to make available to us, not only in this first initial period between you know, the decision being taken and final investment decision. They're looking for around 100 million rand to be spent there. But then also, do they have lots of money to give us to refurbish the refinery? And what PetroSA has said is they want at least $200 million, around 3.8 billion rand for that project. So in setting this criteria, you know, PetroSA decided to put a very strict threshold in place. They said bidders have to get 80% or more, 80 points out of 100, in order to even have their bids evaluated. Now, 20 companies submitted bids, and, you know, lo and behold, the only company that meets this very strict evaluation criteria is Russia's Gasprombank. Now, one of the questions that we put to PetroSA when we were putting this whole story together was to say, look, the average person might read into that and might conclude that you had written the tender to ensure that Gasprombank was the only bidder that made it through. That, unfortunately, was one of the questions that PetroSA didn't want to answer.
And why didn't they want to answer initially? Because today there was the briefing that was convened where basically, as you were just hearing, the acting CEO defending the process and saying everything they've done is above board. Also talking about the concerns that have been flagged in your reporting about potential spillover effect, if you will, for South Africa as a result of the Western sanctions against Russia, tied to, of course, the invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating one. Most of us who've been trying to get answers out of PetroSA on numerous deals, you know, you just don't get responses from them. So fascinating today to see them kind of coming out and talking about the deal for the first time. I also think it was interesting, you know, the clip that you played initially of Minister Ntshavheni saying, essentially kind of, you know, trying to make out that Cabinet didn't really know about this kind of, you know, 19 out of 20 bidders being eliminated on this strict technical criteria. What was interesting is 2 hours later, PetroSA give a press conference and say, yes, absolutely, we gave all of that information to Cabinet in order to enable them to make that decision. Now, included in the information that Cabinet would have received would be 2 legal opinions, one kind of dealing with question marks around the process, how Gasprombank had ended up as the only bidder, whether PetroSA could actually, you know, negotiate with other bidders, which was what PetroSA's board had initially advised because of the question mark around sanctions. And then the second legal opinion, which deals with this sort of tricky question about, is South Africa going to face secondary sanctions as a result of this decision?
Mm-hmm. So just on that, right, the issue of what Minister Ntshavheni had to say today, and basically saying, listen, Cabinet, to a degree, was not involved in some of the finer details as set out later in the PetroSA briefing. Was it a good enough attempt, if you will, to remove Cabinet from the scene, should there indeed be some form of retaliation or, shall we say, a negative outcome based on what has now been confirmed in the deal with Gasprombank?
It's a fascinating point you raise. You know, the deal hasn't even been done yet, and already Cabinet is trying to say, look, we weren't there, we didn't see anything. At least that would be sort of my interpretation of it. They definitely seemed a little bit nervous to confirm how much they knew. I think, look, one way the Cabinet can put that all to bed is by releasing the submissions that PetroSA made to Cabinet so that we can actually see some transparency around this deal, which unfortunately is sort of sorely missing in most of PetroSA's interactions with the press.
So apart from the concerns then about PetroSA potentially tailoring the bid indeed to favour Gasprombank, the bid itself by Gasprombank, was it a poor quality bid or was it really our best option?
Well, I'd love to know. I mean, it's one of the consequences of everyone else being eliminated at the technical evaluation stage is that we really didn't get a chance to figure out whether any of the other offers were better for us. PetroSA really has made the argument that we desperately need the refinery to be restarted, particularly as other refining capacity in the country has been shut down. The question is, did we really need it so desperately that we had to go with Gasprombank, which comes with this, acknowledged risk that, however small, we could face really serious consequences for going into this deal with Russia. The Reserve Bank it's actually just removed secondary sanctions from their sort of list of their risk matrix of financial risks facing the country. But they had previously said, there's a real risk if we do face secondary sanctions because of our sort of perceived closeness with Russia, that, parts of the economy could cease to function.
Well, Cabinet basically said today, Susan, in the briefing, Minister Ntshavheni basically said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that basically a deal with a Russian entity such as Gasprombank would be pursued in line with the BRICS commitment to trade among the countries that are part of the group of nations. And I wonder if the West will indeed impose any serious sanctions against South Africa, given that even when there's been fierce disagreement as far as what South Africa said was an attempt to bully it in order to condemn Russia, Pretoria has stood firm.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't think anyone really knows. What was posed in the PetroSA decision making was, is South Africa going to face secondary sanctions over, a relationship with Gasprombank? That's the legal opinions essentially concluded the risk is quite low of that happening. However, that doesn't mean that there are not consequences for us doing that. We are in the process of trying to remain in AGOA, which gives us huge economic advantages. Simply because we might avoid the risk of secondary sanctions doesn't mean that there aren't consequences that are going to follow. PetroSA, for instance, does a lot of business with a number of other international companies that may have to rethink their decision to transact with PetroSA if they go ahead and take this huge amount of money from Russia.
And it's important as we conclude our conversation, Susan, to state that this is not finalized yet. There are still checks and balances which will have to be done in the new year. Is there potential at that level that the deal could in fact be halted or done away with altogether?
Yeah, I mean, as you point out, this isn't a final decision to go ahead with the refurbishment. What happens now over the next 4 months is that PetroSA and Gasprombank jointly develop a business case. Gasprombank has, presumably if they scored full marks on this front, they would have put aside around 100 million rand to make available for that process. Once there is a business case, that will then be presented again and a final decision is taken. So it's not definite that we'll go ahead and refurbish this refinery and enter into what could be a sort of 20-year deal potentially with Gasprombank. But the money is starting to flow. The relationship is there because they are entering into this development of the joint business case.
Susan Comrie, good to speak to you. Susan, a journalist with Amabhungane, speaking to us tonight on News at Prime. Thank you.